Mrs. Anderson, could you stay after the parent-teacher conference? There's something we need to discuss. Mrs. Thompson, my son Oliver's fourth-grade teacher, gave me a concerned look that made my stomach twist. I watched as other parents filed out of the classroom, some giving me strange sideways glances. Once we were alone, Mrs. Thompson pulled out a manila envelope. "This was submitted to the school office last week," she said carefully, sliding a document across the desk. "Given the circumstances, we need to verify some information." My heart stopped as I read the header. Cowright Order of TUSTODY and WGIFIKHYAN. According to the document, I had lost custody of my children to their paternal grandmother, Margaret Wheeler, due to emotional instability and unsafe living conditions. "This is forged," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I have full custody of my children. Their father passed away 2 years ago." Mrs. Thompson's expression softened slightly. "Mrs. Anderson, we take custody arrangements very seriously. Your mother-in-law provided quite detailed documentation." Of course she did. Margaret had been trying to take my children since David's death, convinced that a young widow couldn't properly raise her precious grandchildren. "I can provide the real custody papers," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady, "and my lawyer's contact information." "There's something else," Mrs. Thompson added. "Mrs. Wheeler has requested to be added as the primary emergency contact and decision-maker for both Oliver and Emma, my 9-year-old son and 7-year-old daughter, the only pieces of David I had left. The thought of Margaret trying to take them made my blood boil. "I understand this is difficult," Mrs. Thompson continued, "but until we can verify the legitimate custody arrangement, we need to follow the most recent documentation. Mrs. Wheeler will need to be present for any future parent-teacher meetings or school decisions." I left the classroom in a daze, my mind racing. Margaret had gone too far this time. But as I walked to my car, a memory surfaced, Oliver's excited voice just that morning. "Mom, wait till you see my family history project. It's going to be the best one in class." My son had spent weeks working on it, collecting photos, documents, and stories. He'd been so secretive, wanting it to be a surprise. The project presentation was scheduled for next week's school assembly. At home, I found Oliver and Emma playing in the backyard while our neighbor, Mrs. Collins, watched them. She'd been a godsend since David's death, helping with childcare while I worked as a pediatric nurse. "Mom." Oliver ran to hug me. "Did Mrs. Thompson tell you about the assembly? Everyone's parents are coming to see the projects." I hugged him tight, breathing in the familiar scent of sunshine and grass. "Of course I'll be there, sweetheart." "Grandma Margaret said she's coming too," Emma added. "She visited us at lunch today." My head snapped up. "What?" Mrs. Collins stepped forward, frowning. "I was going to tell you. Margaret showed up at the school during lunch period. Said she had permission to visit the children." Of course she did. She was laying the groundwork, making sure everyone at school saw her as the involved, concerned grandmother. That evening, after the kids were asleep, I called my lawyer, Michael Santos. He'd helped me secure full custody after David's death, when Margaret first tried to claim I was an unfit mother. "She did what?" Michael's voice was sharp. "Sarah, this is serious. Forging court documents is a criminal offense." I know, I sighed, rubbing my temples. "But Margaret has friends in high places. Remember how she almost convinced the court I was unstable last time?" "That was different," Michael said. "We had clear evidence of your competence as a mother. Your record as a pediatric nurse, character witnesses, the children's counselor's testimony. And now she's trying to erase all that," I said. "She's painting me as an emotional wreck who can't handle raising 2 kids alone." "We'll fight this," Michael assured me. "I'll contact the school first thing tomorrow with the real custody documents. But Sarah, be careful. Margaret wouldn't have done this without a broader plan." He was right. My mother-in-law was many things, but sloppy wasn't one of them. This was just the opening move in whatever game she was playing. The next morning, I got a text from Margaret herself. "I'm only doing what's best for my grandchildren. Don't make this difficult, Sarah." I stared at the message, remembering all the little digs over the years, how she criticized my parenting, my job, my decision to keep working after David died. In her eyes, I'd never been good enough for her son, and now I wasn't good enough to raise his children. But as I drove Oliver and Emma to school, watching them laugh and chat in the backseat, I felt a fierce determination rise in my chest. These were my children. They were happy, healthy, and loved. No forged documents or manipulated school officials would change that. Mom? Oliver's voice pulled me from my thoughts. You're coming to the assembly next week, right? My project is really special. I met his eyes in the rearview mirror, David's eyes, bright with excitement. I wouldn't miss it for the world, sweetheart. What I didn't know then was that Oliver's mysterious family history project was about to change everything. But first, I had to survive a week of Margaret's escalating attempts to take control of my children's lives, each day bringing a new challenge to my role as their mother. And somewhere in our house, hidden in Oliver's room among his project materials, lay evidence that would expose not just Margaret's forged documents, but a truth she'd been hiding for decades. The next few days were a carefully orchestrated nightmare. Margaret seemed to be everywhere, always one step ahead of me. On Tuesday morning, I arrived at school to find her already there, talking with the principal. "Oh, Sarah," she called out, her voice dripping with fake concern. "We were just discussing Oliver's recent behavioral issues." "What behavioral issues?" I demanded, but Margaret had already steered the principal away, leaving me standing alone in the hallway. That afternoon, Oliver came home quiet and withdrawn. "Grandma said I shouldn't show you my project until it's finished," he mumbled when I asked about it. "She said you might get upset." I found Emma in her room, sorting through her clothes. "Grandma says we need to pack some things to keep at her house," she explained innocently, "for when we start living there." My hands shook as I called Michael. "She's poisoning them against me," I said, trying to keep my voice down. "And the school's treating her like she has authority over everything." "The real custody documents have been sent," he assured me. "But Sarah, there's something else. The judge's signature on Margaret's forged documents. It's good, too good. Someone with real legal access helped create these papers." Wednesday brought more surprises. Margaret had somehow arranged to volunteer in Oliver's class, specifically during their work time on the family history projects. When I tried to enter the classroom to bring Oliver his forgotten lunch, I was politely but firmly turned away. "Mrs. Wheeler has asked that we limit disruptions during project time," the school secretary explained. That evening, I was helping Emma with homework when Oliver burst into the house, eyes wide with excitement. "Mom, I found the most amazing thing in Dad's old." He stopped abruptly, looking behind me. Margaret stood in our doorway, using the key she'd apparently copied without my knowledge. "Oliver, darling," she said smoothly, "remember what we discussed about the project being a surprise?" She turned to me. "Sarah, we need to talk about the children's summer arrangements. I've enrolled them in some excellent programs." "Get out of my house," I said quietly, stepping between her and my children. Margaret's smile never wavered. "Now, Sarah, this hostility isn't healthy for the children. Perhaps we should discuss your emotional state." "My emotional state is perfectly fine," I replied, even as I felt my heart racing. "And you have no right to be here." "I have every right," she said, pulling out her phone. "In fact, I've documented several concerning incidents of your instability. Would you like me to share these with your lawyer?" After she left, I found Oliver in his room, surrounded by papers and old photo albums. "Mom," he said hesitantly, "why does Grandma have different signatures on all her old letters?" Before I could ask what he meant, my phone buzzed with messages from other parents. Margaret had apparently joined the school's parent association and was sharing her concerns about my fitness as a mother. The whispers were spreading. Thursday morning, I discovered Margaret had contacted my supervisor at the hospital, suggesting that my unstable home situation might be affecting my work performance. By afternoon, she convinced the school to temporarily suspend my access to the children's academic portal, claiming the custody situation needed to be clarified. But something was changing. Oliver had stopped showing Margaret his project when she visited the classroom. Mrs. Thompson mentioned that he asked to keep his materials locked in her cabinet instead of taking them home. "He's very protective of his research," she told me during a brief conversation. Yesterday, he asked me some interesting questions about handwriting analysis. Friday brought the biggest shock. I arrived home to find a family services worker on my doorstep. "We've received some concerning reports," she began. But before she could continue, Oliver came running out. "Mom, look what I found in Dad's old office boxes." He was waving a stack of yellowed envelopes. Margaret's car screeched into our driveway. She rushed toward us with a speed that belied her age. "Oliver, give those to Grandma right now." But Oliver stood his ground, something of his father's quiet strength in his stance. "No, Grandma. Mom needs to see these. They're part of my project." "What project?" the family services worker asked, looking confused. "My family history project," Oliver said proudly. "It's about how secrets leave clues, even years later, like Grandma's different signatures and the dates that don't match and the letters Dad never knew about." Margaret's face went pale. "Oliver, those are private family matters. But that's why they're perfect for my project," he insisted. "Mrs. Thompson said family history helps us understand who we really are. And I found out who you really are, Grandma." I looked at my 9-year-old son, suddenly realizing that while Margaret had been so busy trying to control the narrative at school, Oliver had been piecing together a very different story from the family records he'd been studying. The school assembly was 3 days away. Whatever Oliver had discovered in his research, whatever truth he'd found in those old letters and photographs, Margaret was terrified of it being revealed. And judging by the family services worker's thoughtful expression as she observed the exchange, Margaret's carefully constructed plan was already beginning to unravel. Monday morning arrived with the school auditorium packed for the 4th grade family history presentations. Margaret sat in the front row, tension visible in her rigid posture. The family services worker had decided to attend, along with Michael, my lawyer, who insisted on being present. Oliver was third to present. As he walked to the podium carrying his display board and a manila envelope, I noticed Mrs. Thompson smiling encouragingly. "My project is called The Story Behind the Signatures," Oliver began, his voice clear and confident. "It started when I found Dad's old boxes in the attic." He unfolded his display board, revealing rows of photocopied signatures. "This is Grandma Margaret's signature from 1985. He pointed to the first one. "And this is from 1986. They're completely different, but that's not the strange part." Margaret stood up. "Oliver, this isn't appropriate." "Please let him finish," the principal interjected, looking intrigued. Oliver continued, "I found these letters in Dad's old office boxes. They're from his real mom, Elizabeth Wheeler." He held up the yellowed envelopes. "She didn't die when he was a baby like Grandma Margaret always said. She wrote to him every year until he was 18. The auditorium went silent. Margaret sank back into her seat, her face ashen. See, Grandma Margaret wasn't Dad's real mom. She was his stepmom. But when his real mom tried to stay in contact, Grandma Margaret hid all the letters. Oliver turned to a new page in his presentation. "That's why the signatures are different. Grandma was signing Elizabeth's name on school forms and custody papers." My lawyer leaned forward, suddenly very alert. "But the biggest discovery was this," Oliver said, opening the manila envelope. "When Dad's real mom, Elizabeth, tried to fight for custody, Grandma Margaret forged documents saying Elizabeth was unfit, just like she's doing to my mom now." He pulled out more papers. "I found the real court records in Dad's boxes. Elizabeth tried to tell everyone what Grandma Margaret was doing, but nobody believed her. And now Grandma's doing the same thing to my mom." Margaret stood again, her voice shaking. "These are family matters, private things. That's why I made this project," Oliver continued, his voice growing stronger. "Because Mrs. Thompson said family history teaches us about patterns, and I found the pattern. Grandma Margaret takes people's children away by lying about them." He turned to the final page of his presentation, which showed 2 documents side by side. "This is the custody paper Grandma forged about my mom last week, and this is the one she forged about Elizabeth 30 years ago. They have the same mistakes in the legal words, and look at the signatures." "Enough," Margaret shouted, but the family services worker was already examining the documents. "Young man," she said carefully, "are you saying you found evidence of historical custody fraud while researching your family tree?" Oliver nodded earnestly. "I wanted to understand why Grandma was being so mean to Mom. Then I found all these old papers, and it made sense. She did the same thing to Dad's real mom." The principal stood up. "Mrs. Wheeler, I believe we need to have a serious discussion about the custody documents you submitted last week." "You don't understand," Margaret began, but Michael was already approaching with his phone out. "I understand perfectly," he said. "I've just forwarded these findings to the district attorney. Custody fraud is a serious crime, Mrs. Wheeler, especially when it shows a pattern over decades. I walked to Oliver and hugged him tight. I'm so proud of you, I whispered. I knew you were a good mom, he whispered back. And I found out Dad's real mom is still alive. She lives in Oregon. Can we meet her? 3 months later, we sat in a cozy living room in Portland, watching Oliver and Emma get to know their grandmother Elizabeth. Margaret had been charged with multiple counts of fraud, and the investigation had uncovered similar attempts at custody interference with other families over the years. I never thought anyone would believe me, Elizabeth said softly, showing the children old photos of their father as a boy. When Margaret married their grandfather and took over everything, I tried so hard to stay in David's life. Oliver believed you, I replied, watching my son carefully organize his project materials, now important legal evidence, into a special binder. He saw the pattern when nobody else did. Emma looked up from a photo album. Mom, can we stay with Grandma Elizabeth for Christmas? Real grandma, not me grandma. Of course, Elizabeth and I sat together, and then laughed. Later that night, as I tucked Oliver into bed in Elizabeth's guest room, he asked, Mom, are you still mad about my secret project? I smiled and kissed his forehead. Sweetheart, your secret project saved our family, and it helped us find a grandmother who knows that love doesn't need forged papers or fake signatures. It just needs the truth. And good research, Oliver added sleepily, making me laugh. And good research, I agreed, turning out the light. Sweet dreams, my brilliant detective.